Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Alexi. I'm going to be the one running this webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time. We know it's in December. It's the last one of the year, and we're all waiting to go on holiday. But I promise you, it's going to be worth your time. I'm a solutions engineer here at Retool, and I wanted to go over today a few things around software essentials for app building. In my job on a current basis, I've been working with more and more people that are building inside Retool, and we've actually realized that the persona building has sort of expanded over the years, and it's less and less software engineers running. So this is what I wanted to talk about today and make sure that we go through a lot of the things that you're going to encounter when you're building from now on. Now, what can you expect for today? The first thing is I'm going to talk about software in general and how it's becoming more and more accessible. And then we're going to do a build along where we're going to explore different topics that I've seen a lot of people run into from the data, the ops, or even the PM world. And we'll end with Q&As. So don't hesitate. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. We'll be sending you quite a lot of material throughout. There's a document to follow with the build along. So normally you should find quite a lot of links during this webinar that are there. And if you have any questions, I have Ollie, who is more than happy to help you with that. So if you see any messages from him, he's from the organizing team, and he says the truth. So the first thing is the level of abstraction when it comes to building software is reducing with time. 50 years ago, it was, well, basically like machine languages, binary. And from there, as the years have gone on, we've sort of expanded who is able to develop across the way. Only a few years ago, before the rise of ChatGPT, OpenAI, and even low code in general, the statistic that was thrown around was that around only 1% of people were capable of coding as a whole. And the whole idea that we had in the 2010 era was to really develop what we called citizen developers. The thing that we wanted to solve was allowing more business people to be able to develop applications. And it just ended up that the frameworks that we had at the time and the sort of way that code worked at that day wasn't good enough to allow them to really create flexible, production grade quality applications when it comes to enterprise. So that died down a bit. But since then, we've had a resurgence of visual interfaces and, of course, AI coding that has allowed more and more people to simply develop as a whole. So today in Retool, it's exactly what we're going to explore, the visual interface and a bit more of the vibe coding aspect, which is why we've seen many of you come to our platform. So as I was saying, today, well, the builder profile inside Retool is really changing. Initially, it was mainly software engineers, and I think that was true until 3 to 4 years ago. But today, what we've seen is that 40% of Retool builders are not software engineers. They're data people, ops people, and some of our biggest clients today are still from that world. So I'm talking like companies like LVMH, like NBC Universal, like Pernod like Zeus, very, very big organizations that are driven by data, ops, or engineering. Oh, sorry, not engineering, people like product managers, product owners, mainly people from the product side. And all of these personas are sort of expanding to them. This isn't an issue at all. On the contrary, it's super exciting for us because it really enables us to have a new sort of entire world of people that are building, and it's actually making our platform be ever the more used, which is a great thing. But we've also realized that these personas in general, they tend to struggle a bit with certain parts of the platform, which are due to the fact that they aren't traditional software engineers. So there are sort of four main topics that I've been seeing when I've been running, be it hackathons, be it calls with clients, and this is what we're going to go through today. The first one is on UX UI and working with design systems. So we're going to explore that. Also, I think in the internal development world, which is where Retool is specialized, it's even more true that you generally don't have UX UI people to help you. So often the one building is also the one defining the entire UI. The second thing is the notion of front end and back end, which is a notion that has a lot of implication into what happens where, how does code run, and you tend to have a lot of issues when it comes to performance or other things that we're going to explore. The next one is what we call the event loop, or essentially all of the actions and how you can trigger them inside the tool. So we're going to explore how that works, so you can make sure that you have control over whatever's running and at what time to make your applications work the way you intended and in a performant way. And finally, it's going to be very basic things around best practices and how you can incorporate RAI that allows you to develop faster inside these best practices to help you when you're building. For the build along, this actually, what we're going to be building is something that comes from a friend of mine. So I have a friend who's a data analyst and he's got into aviation, he's becoming a pilot, and he wanted to sort of track where all of the airports are in the world. And he started using Retool. And I realized when I was working with him that he encountered all of the specific problems that I was mentioning to you. So what I'm going to do is sort of retrace with you what I did with him and covering all of the topics along the way. So it's really going to be about reproducing real world like building experience, and we're going to pause along the way for all of the concepts that we want to attend. This being said, let's get right into the building phase. Now, I will start by saying I hope most of you are here. So I'll just give you 10 seconds to connect to this. The most important part is the login phase to EMEA agents. You should have normally, I sent this out this morning, an invitation for you to be invited to the instance. If it's not the case, please put a message in the chat and Ollie will add you there. I'll just give you like 30 seconds to connect, hoping you don't have any issues on that end. So let me just look quickly at the chat. I think quite a few of you are in. So first of all, welcome to the main page of Retool. What you can see here is the initial page that we all have, and we're directly going to go into building. So you can click on this blue button right here to create an application, create an app, and from this you will arrive on a blank canvas. The first thing that I did with my friend though, before even getting into building itself was, do you want some inspiration in terms of UI UX? And I sent him a few links to them, and there's one of them that he actually liked more than the others. And this one is Bugtool. He saw this and he was like, in terms of design, I love it and I want this. The initial discussion we had then was, is this good in terms of UI UX? Are there good practices in this application that he should retake? And when he's going to show all of the airports, should he actually make them look like this or not? And that's the first thing that I sort of want us to consider is the importance of UI UX when it comes to internal tools, and then how to interact with the design system. So these are the two things that we're going to see in this first phase. How to start? First of all, in this application, there are a lot of things that are done actually really right when it comes to UI UX. The first thing is everything in terms of naming actually makes sense. So this is a tool that resembles Jira, and in Jira in Linear, you talk about issues. So the first thing that's really good is that the wording that's used around this application is very good. Everything's linked to what it should be and what the real world actually is. It's an issue. The second thing is like the nav bar on the left-hand side is the same. It's consistent across the application. And I can see that all of the different parts in terms of design and UI are very consistent. It's the same colors everywhere. Whatever I do, I sort of see it in the same way. The third thing that's really good is this drop down right here. What you can see is that it actually gives quite a lot of space for us to have more information, and I can really see it in a clear way. There's nothing here that's not useful, and that's really, really good in terms of UA UX principles. However, we do have a few issues. The first one is I've got some buttons that actually don't seem to do anything. So of course that doesn't really make sense. And as a user, I want to click on them, but I can't. In terms of other things that I want to do, I realized on clicking on new issue that I had other issues when it comes to UI UX. The first one that I see is I filled nothing in and I can already click and hover create issue as though I could. And if I click on it, I don't know what's just happened. These are sort of the basics of what is going on in terms of UI UX. And I don't think that you should arrive on an application and never know what's going on. If something's loading, you want to see it. If you can't click on a button, which should be the case here because I've done nothing, you shouldn't be able to. And these are the first things that I really want a lot of these new builders to think about is what should I think of in terms of UX UI? What you need to know is that there's an entire field of research around that, as you are all aware of. However, what we do when it comes to internal tools is there are two things. The first one is on internal tools, UX is way more important than UI. UI in general, which is the styling of the components, is way less important compared to clicks. On internal tools, you're really looking for operational efficiency. So you want to make things super simple where nobody can sort of go wrong when it comes to your application. And also, if you can click on a button, you can be sure that a user will click on a button. We've all seen applications used in a way that isn't conventional. When it comes to best practices, what I would consider for you to look into first is so that there are 10 usability heuristics that have been out for quite some long time by Jakob Nielsen, who's a great designer. And it's the first thing that I would advise you actually to think about when you start building a system is how do I want to build them? How will the user be? And these are sort of 10 global principles that will already give you a very good idea of what you should do for usability. I won't go through all of them because we're actually going to go through quite a few when we're building. But the main three to have are things that we actually talked about. The first one is visibility of system status. It's you should always be informed of what's going on. So in bug tool, when I create a new issue and do this, I don't know what's going on. That's very bad in terms of design. The second thing is your systems should match between the system and the real world. So typically here, the fact that everything's called an issue is very good because it makes it super simple for me to understand what's going on. And you really want to not use any jargon that you're using. And for the rest of them, I'd more than advise you to look into this when you're building out and use this more as a checklist of how to build good UI UX. This being said, let's get back to building and we're going to try and build something quite close to this. So normally you should all by this point be on a blank page. And the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to add the navbar for reusability. So every single time that somebody wants to change a page, we'll be able to. And to do this, you can click on the component tree because the navbar is global. That's why it's not on a given page. It's at a global level. And if you click on the plus right here, you'll be able to add a sidebar that will automatically connect a logo and a navigation component. So I'll just give you 10 seconds to follow this. And during that time, I'm going to go and I'm not a huge fan of random logos. So I'm going to use ours, but don't hesitate. You can change this in terms of URL. Now, the logo I've put right here. So once again, if you have access to the documentation, you can find our logo here or use yours. Please don't hesitate. So let me put that in. And I can see that Retool fits in. When we're getting to styling, there's already something that we can talk about right here, is when it comes to components and dragging, well, components that are already on the canvas, you have an entire panel on the right-hand side where actually you can do a lot when it comes to appearance. This is the second thing is we've got a huge amount of components inside Retool. And while I'm going to be trying to recreate the bug tool, but for my airports, I'm going to want to use as many components that already exist as I can. And it's very important for you to sort of look into the design system because that's how you're going to know what you can build quickly or not. And I think most of you are looking for efficiency when it comes to building tools. The more you know the component library, the more you'll be able to know what capabilities you can and cannot build super quickly inside Retool. Same goes for styling. On this logo, if you've imported our logo, you'll see that it fits quite well. If it's not the case, you'll probably want to play around with cover and contain. Essentially, cover will expand your logo to make it fill, but sometimes it cuts some of the borders to make it fill. And contain, it will just make sure that your entire logo is present. But if you have super wide borders on this, you'll see certain issues on the UI side. So when it comes to styling UI, look at the appearance of all of these components, and that will really help you going forward. The second thing that we're going to do, now that we've changed the logo URL and styled it, is look a bit more into the navigation component. Right now, I see that it's called page one, and I see that it's mapped to my data sources of pages. This is something very traditional that you're going to have, and we want to change this to something that actually makes sense. So I'm going to try and call this airports, for example. So I'm going to click on the Pages tab right here and click on page one. And when you have this, you have the configuration panel of the page that will appear on the right-hand side. And I want you to go through the content and change the page title. In this case, we're going to go towards airports. And automatically, I see that this has been called airports. We also mentioned this was a navigation component. I just wanted you to see that if you add a new page automatically, it will be added to the navigation. So this already in terms of structure, when it comes to making things very clear, it does it by default, and it's one of the features of the navigation component that you can explore. If you wanted to know exactly how this works, you have the entire description of what happens here, where essentially it maps through the different pages that you have. So in this case, page one and page two, and it reuses the titles that you have. All about configuring the design system. Give you 10 seconds to be up to date, and then we'll move to the second part around how do we display, well, the table component as itself. Let's carry on. So on the right-hand side now, this is the place where if I go back to bug tool, I would want to have, I have two views when it comes to this. I have an issue view and the project view. So the first thing that I see is that the entire UI in the middle of my screen changes depending on where I am. By the way, I won't use the breadcrumbs because that's one other thing that I found a bit weird, is that they don't work. They don't do anything. So let's for now just focus on having like two tabs, and we'll first do the airports like this and then look later at how we can do the project view. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go towards a component called the tab container, which I'm going to drag and drop on the screen. And I'm going to rearrange this on my screen. What you can see in terms of grid when it comes to positioning elements is that you have different aspects. The first one is actually simply using the entirety of the grid. So please do. And then what I can see is that I was able to move it from left to right, but not from top to bottom. This once again is a feature of the design system. If I go to the layout and appearance, what I can see is that the height is automatic. And that is one of the concepts inside CSS, which essentially means that your components will only stack on, well, sorry, the parent tab container will only be as big as the components that are within. That's not exactly what I want because when I look at bug tool, it's more of a fixed sort of list that's infinite. So what I'm going to do is change this to fixed in here, and I'm just going to tell it to take the entire page. So something like this sounds good to me. What I also see on bug tool is that I don't have the borders that I have automatically. So right now, what you can see is that there's space between my space bar and my page main. I want to remove that. And that is everything that's linked to padding, margin, things like that. So I'm going to remove the padding on the page aspect. And on the tab container, I'm going to do exactly the same, remove the margin and remove the padding. So every single time that I'm doing this, I'm clicking on the elements, going to the bottom of the right hand side panel and deselecting the margin and the padding. When it comes to a tab container, I have different views, and the idea is that the components that will be shown here are different depending on the view. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a table. That's the main component that we have. And let me just drag and drop this. And we're going to check that this table is only for the first view. And it's the case, which is great. So that already means in terms of creating navigational structure, we've got a sidebar that we can reuse from one page to another. By the way, it's already bind in the sense that I'm moving from one page to another when I click on one of these two. I've got my tab containers, which will allow me to separate my visions. And I'm very, very quickly getting to something that is looking more and more like Bugtool. The next thing I'm going to do is change the tabs. Right now, they're called View 1, View 2, View 3. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So what I'm going to do is click on one of the views and change them. Now, the key well, stay the same, but what I'm mainly going to change is the label and just call this airports, for example. And I'm going to call it airports table compared to airports project, which is where I would do the other kind of disposition. The third view I don't need, so I'm going to click on the 3 points at the end and delete them. And you should have something that looks much more like the issue views, the project views, as we had in Bugtool. The next thing that we see when it comes to this table is that right now it's only taking part of the component, whereas here it was taking the entire space. This, once again, in terms of UI, is really knowing what your design system does. And in the appearance part, we can see that there's a property called expand content to fit. And when I hover over it, I can see that it removes all padding and margin, causes the container to take up the entire space. And this is true when there's a single component in the container. So I'm going to click on this, and automatically my table fits the container perfectly. So I don't have any, whatever the size of my screen, whatever I do, I'm really defining this so that the table will always take its entire place. This is great. This means that now we've got a design that looks way closer to what Bugtool was, but there are still a few things that I want to change if I look at Bugtool, and generally in terms of UI UX that aren't interesting. The first one is my data. So when it comes to the table is right now, if I click on it, you might have to close a few tabs to do this. You can see that I'm using demo data, so that I will change to query airports right afterwards. The That's one of the things that I'm looking at. The other things is in terms of columns, there are a few columns that I wouldn't like. Here, for example, the ID, I don't think any end user would be interested in that. I can see that I can make certain columns hidden, certain columns editable, and actually go further in terms of how they're defined. So that's one of the things that I'm looking into when I'm defining them to really fit the UI. And then the second thing that that I'm looking at when it looks to this table and styling in general is that the colors of Bucktool don't look at all like they do here. Right now, everything is everything's kind of pure white everywhere. And I want to change these colors. That's a super important concept when it comes to design system in general, is that these components that we're using right now, they are functional components that we can then, as we saw, change the style in the bottom right hand side. So technically, now I'm on the table component, I could add a lot of styles. For example, I could say that the background of this table and change it to something. Oh, sorry, that's a bit of a flash. I shouldn't have chosen something so colorful. That's not much better. But essentially, I could style um, my entire application this way using these kind of elements and styles that are right here. The thing is, I'm going to lack consistency when it comes to bigger applications. I'd really like all of my design system to fit exactly what I have, and that's what I want to look into. And there's a concept that we've built out for this in terms of design system, which is themes. Themes you can find if you look into the app settings, you have an app theme, and this is a way actually for you to customize the UI aspect of everything that you're drag and dropping onto the canvas. And it is the first layer of what will happen to any given component. So I'm going to quickly show you what it looks like if it will open for me. And then we'll come back to the application and apply a theme or two. So the idea of a theme is every single component that you have, you can reuse throughout your application, and a button will always be red by default. It's really setting the default of everything that you have. So what I would advise you to do is use themes wherever you have consistent UIs wherever you go. It will help you build faster, and it will add a lot of consistency to your applications. Now let me just go back to where I was before, to my airports application, and I'll just go through a few themes for you to see the difference. So I'll just remove this. And if you look at what happens on my right-hand side, when I'm clicking on a few of them, the UI is drastically changing depending on that. And that is how you will be able to create way better UX UIs in general. One last thing, when it comes to UX UI, the rules of them are always the same. And I think this is something that trips quite a lot of people up. The theme is the default, and the styles that you put here will override whatever you do. So if I wanted to do as before and change the background, because I've defined the background at the element level, this one will be the one that will actually be used. So if I'm going to put this in yellow, um, this will be the one that will be used. To do a bit of a summary of everything that we've seen in terms of UX UIs, what you want to look at is how do I build clarity? How do I build navigation in general so that it looks well? In terms of all of the elements and the components that I have, you really have a lot to learn in terms of how they work, what are the interactions, what do all the information in the right-hand side panel sort of mean? And if you want to know if your application is following sort of the best practices or not, please don't hesitate to come back to these 10 sort of usability heuristics, and they will be a very good checklist to know if you're implementing the right UX and the right UI that comes into this. With that being said, let's go into the second topic. The second thing that we want to look at is right now we don't have any data around airports. And of course, that's not what you want because we do want an airport table. This brings us to the second aspect, which is how do we query data and how do we make that data efficient and make sure that our applications don't lag. So the first thing that we want to do is connect data to this table. So I'm just going to click on the table. And as we saw before, we were using demo data. I don't want to use this. I actually want to connect to a data source. So I'm gonna use a query, and to use a query, you can open on the left-hand side the code panel. This will open the resources. You can connect to Retool database. So this has already been set up for you, and I've given you the code. In this case, we want to select everything from airports, so you can select stuff from airports. Airports is a table that I've put into the backend where essentially We found the data set of all the airports online, and we've imported this into the system. So let me save and run this. And the thing is, it's going to take a while. It's going to take actually, it's going to take a pretty long time. And the problem is, as you can imagine right now, there's a lot of airports. There's like 83,000 of them, maybe more, when it comes to the number of airports that you have. So actually, the query ran for nearly 20 seconds if you looked at the bottom of my screen. And right now it's, yeah, 83,792 airports. That's a huge amount. If I look at my table on the right-hand side, it's even kind of bugging out because it's hardly capable of creating or generating the table itself. And this is sort of the second concept that I see a lot of people stumble into, which is what is going on? Why is my application taking so long? And what is sort of the difference? Well, the solution to this is what is the difference between a backend and a front end? What's going on? The first thing to know, and when I became a software engineer, it's how it was explained to me. You can see the back end as a kitchen and the front end as a dining table. And in this case, what we said is that us, when we ordered, we asked in the kitchen for them to bring every single airport in the database. And so what they had to do was basically scramble around and find the 83,000 ingredients or airports in this case, and then bring it back to us so that we could actually start using them and look into them. It's an ungodly amount of work. And even for me, when I'm in my dining room, if you bring me 83,000 ingredients, to just have them there, show them on a screen, it takes me a lot of time to render this. And this is where you have the difference between a backend and a front end. The front end is essentially what you see. It's your machine, it's your telephone, it's your computer right now. And what's important to know is where does the code run? When you're bringing 83,000 elements to your front end, you're asking your phone, your device, to show 83,000 lines of elements. So for one, it's taking a very long time because it has to send you everything. That also means that over the internet, well, you're essentially sending ungodly amounts of information. So that takes a long time. If you have users that are in places that don't have good connection, this is going to take a crazy amount of time. And I think we can all imagine that waiting 20 seconds for our application to load, it would probably be off by then. It's just too long for us to sort of look into. So what we actually want to do in this case is not have everything sent to the front end and then tell our table components, oh, you can handle it, but actually have our back end send us less information, but that we can show quickly. And there's a trade-off right here. By the way, once the information's been given over, like once you've got everything in your dining room, you can select whatever you want. So actually here, now it's pretty responsive. Like if I scroll down, sorry, if I scroll down on the table, I might not be able to do it. If I scroll down on the table like this, I'm actually like everything's showing up super fast, but I had the initial load of 20 seconds that was pretty long. When it comes to things like filters, they will also work. So if I wanted to add a filter rule saying that the type had to include heliport, so the type is this column, for example, including heliports, it's going to take a bit of time because right now it's my machine, it's my computer that's actually doing the filtering. And it's found 22,000 records out of the 83,000. It's capable of doing it quite snappily, but it's still not exactly what we want. So how do we fix this? We can go back to our table, and as I said initially, we don't want to show all of these columns. So we're going to have to change at the same time the table itself, so that as a user, you know that you're not showing everything, and at the same time, the queries in the backend. To do this, we're going to go into the configuration part to the add-ons that are right here. So if you click on the table and go to the add-ons, you can add pagination. Now, the first thing is when you click on pagination, actually, it automatically renders this part of the table, which now means that it's not an infinite scroll anymore inside my table. I can actually snap through one page to another. That's pretty self-explanatory. The only thing is I'm still sending like the initial load of the document, well, of the number of airports would still be huge in that sense. So that's what we want to change. To do this, we're going to enable server-side pagination to make sure that the load is on our backend, or in the case of a kitchen, well, it would be in the kitchen. And why is that better than in your dining room? Generally, in your kitchen, everything's ordered. You know where things are. So if I tell you to take out 10 different elements of a kitchen. It's stored in a way that's much more easy for you to find anything in there and then send it out. So that's what we want to do it there. And it also, just in general, if you have bad Wi-Fi, a backend will always have good Wi-Fi because it's stored on a server inside a data center 90% of the time. And that means that all of the operations that will be done there are done very efficiently, which is not the case of certain people that are in the field on computers or on phones. We've all had bad connection once. When I click on server-side pagination, the first thing that it tells me is that it wants a page size and a total row count. If I hover over page size, I see an indication, the number of rows to display per page when empty. This is the number of rows that fill the table. So actually, I don't need to put anything in here because by default, it's just going to take the 12 rows, which is what it can show inside my table. But then I need to give it a total row count and actually send over the right information. When we enable it, by the way, you'll see that right now it doesn't, since it doesn't know the total row count, it's not capable of telling you when the pages end. So it, it's completely bugged when it comes to what am I supposed to show. It doesn't know what it's supposed to show on that end. To change this in our query, we can look at our query right now, and we're going to add a limit to the number of elements we want to show to the front end. That's the first part. So the idea is, as we were saying, we want to limit this to the number of elements that our front end is actually going to show. So I'm going to add this, and it's called, I need to select my table, and it's called pagination dot page size. So now if I save and run this, I can see that instead of, well, lasting for 20 seconds, it lasted for nearly less than a second. And right now, I've only queried exactly the elements that I need for my page. So that's really good. The only thing is, there's no link between which page I am at and what I'm querying. So right now, when I do this, I'm just limiting to the 12 first. There's no way of it to know which segment, which 12 part of these 83,000 it should segment. And that's why we have something called offset. And the idea of an offset is to say, if you're on page 12, well, you're actually looking at the elements, well, the 144th element, because you're on the 12th page. There's been already 122 before. So that's the way it works. So what we're going to add actually is an offset. And the offset, once again, is something that we've pre-packaged. So let me just bring that up. And it should be called right now, table1 pagination dot offset. That's the first thing. So right now, at least, when I'm on page 3, what it's going to do is that it knows the offset, as I told you, is so in this case it's 24 because we've on page 1 it's the first 12, on page 2 it's the second 12. So now it's from well 25 to 36. If I scroll through, it's bringing up every single time new ones that I see, and it's super snappy, which is great for me. The next issue I have though is that my count isn't right on the bottom side. So I actually need to tell it the number of rows just so my users know how far this goes. To do this, I'm going to add another query, and I'm going to add, I think I've sent this in document, so please reuse that. In this case, it's select count star of AirPods. So from AirPods. This is a very simple SQL command that any AI system could generate for you today. And essentially what it does is that it gives me the count, but compared to before where it had to find all of the rows, the count star method is a special one in a database that can very quickly give it back to you. So it's not something that you have to query every single time and that will take 20 seconds loading. So here, I'm just going to run it again. And it took like 4 to 5 seconds, which is acceptable, knowing you're only going to do this once. And in the total row count, what I'd like to do is put that in. So to do that, I would open double curly braces, which is our way of putting code in, and say query to, and then I want to put the output. And right here, what I see is that actually, if I look at what my element looks like, I have to call something called data, then I have to call an element called count. And the thing is, this format that it's giving me out is a table. So actually, I have to choose the first element of this table, which gives me this. And right now, when I put this in, it works. So we've got something that's working, but I'm not a huge fan when it comes to building applications with pagination of having a bit of extra code that's inside my element itself. So if you go back to the server side, you can see that right here, I'm writing a bit more code. And this in general isn't something that I'm a huge fan of. The reason is, first of all, why this query is returning a table, and this is normal because actually when you're doing SQL, it will always um, give you a table back. And this is the kind of code snippet. If I have these everywhere across my application, and one day I've got this query that changes, I'm not going to be able to maintain this. We're going to start. So this is actually a bit of a bridge between what is a front end, what's a back end, and also how do we have like best practices coming in into reusing code and making sure it's reusable. But here, I wouldn't want to have this kind of snippet of code here. And what we can do is actually change the query itself so that instead of outputting a table, it outputs exactly what I want, which is the number. And to do this, we're going to introduce the next topic, which is the event loop. So first, we're just going to do it, and then I'm going to talk about the event loop. So what we're going to do is transform the result. The idea is that once this has been run, it will run the transform results part. And what I'm going to do is actually, well, use the count dot zero from with that symbol that I forgot the name of in English. And when I do this and I run it and save it, it automatically gives me exactly the thing that I want. In this case, it's a string. If I wanted it to be a number, I could send it as a number using the parseInt function. I don't need to do this. It just so happens that when you have a string that is a number, most of in JavaScript, it will be cast from a string to a number. So actually here right now, I can just write query.data. And as you can see, it says string to number because it knows that a string and a number, it's basically the same thing. This is super important, as I said, because it's going to allow you to reuse this code way better across your application. And if you change things, it's going to be better going forward. So let me save and run this. We'll also save and run this part with the offset. And I'm going to do one last thing on this query, which is I'm going to order them by ID. Now, the idea of doing this is a bit of a setup for what I'm going to talk about next, but also simply because if I want to refine certain columns that we're going to edit later on, it's going to be easier if they're ordered by a given metric, which in this case is the ID. To finish this topic around front-end and back-end pagination, what we've just seen as a whole is that for one, you right now my table is much more snappy. And the first time I connect, I won't have those 20 seconds because I'm actually delegating the work to the right person. And more globally, this is actually a topic that I've seen a lot of people stumble into and not really understand what's going on. Everything that you see on your screen is happening on your laptop. The other, the other sort of aspect that I see where a lot of people sort of stumble in this too is when it comes to uploading documents. So let me move to page 2. And what I'm going to do is just add a file button. In this case, when you're uploading a file to this, what you're actually doing is that you're uploading it to your computer, to your browser. And so the issue that you have there is that your browser has limits that a server in a data center doesn't. So that's the other thing that you want to look into is what can actually my machine do? And so this is why, for example, we see a lot of threads happen around when I uploaded a file, it wasn't able to because but your file is huge. It's like over 5 GB. And the idea here is because you're doing work that your machine is running and that not a server. So what you want to remember from this is when you have latencies, think about what am I asking different parts of my architecture to do? Am I asking my PC to load like 83,000 rows and show them? How can I split this up? How can I make it so that I'm actually only have just the right data to show to people? And it's a very good principle to only have the right data at the right time. That will speed up your applications massively. This being said, let's move on to the event loop. I'll just give you 10 seconds. I'll drink a bit of water and give you a bit of time to catch up if you want to finish anything linked to pagination. So the event loop. As I was talking to my friend, he comes from the data world, and that's a world where everything is read-only, which means that you don't write back to system. You only get information. You don't do anything with that information. It's also actually one of the things that Retool solves, allowing you to write back to systems, but that's another topic. The idea when it comes to the event loop and events in general in an application, it's the predictable set of rules that govern how your code runs. And what we want you to do is allow you to sort of do this very simply and run this simply. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a way to edit the airports so that we can see how this mechanism works. To do that, we're going to be well simply adding a modal and making sure that we can modify the first line. To add a modal, you can click on the components part, add a modal to the frame, and it did not add the modal for some reason. Oh, what's going on? Now, drag and dropping on my end, I'm just going to have to refresh. Sometimes you may have to refresh. If on your end the modal, if the modal doesn't show, we'll just do it another way. But that seems to be a slight bug. Okay, I'll try to do it another way. So another way of doing this is if you go to the component tree, I'm hoping it lets me add a modal this way. Okay, so that's the other way of doing it. If you go to your first page, you can add a modal frame clicking on the plus button if for some reason drag and dropping doesn't work. So in that case, you have this modal, and I'm going to do a very quick thing once you've done it. Remove the header, remove the footer. The only thing that we want to do is modify one of the lines that we see right here. If you want to modify things, you want to add a form. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Click on plus component, add a form, and it should auto-generate a component like the one you see on my screen. And right now, we're going to do the important thing, which is generate it from a table. Because we're looking at talking about the event loop, and this is a bit of a setup to be able to talk about it, I'm going to voluntarily reduce this form to its minimalist version of simply changing. The only thing that I want us to change is the name of a given thing. So if you can go into this, you want to deselect all of the other fields, it won't generate them. The only thing that will be generated is the name. And if I click on generate form, you should have exactly this. And I'm going to call it edit airport. So normally it should look like this. The next thing we want though is to look a bit more into our event loop. Now there are multiple things that we want to do. The first one is if I want to modify a column, I need a way to, when I click on a column, actually get to that modal. And the second thing is when I submit the element of that modal, I want it to go into my system and then to have this page refresh. So let's do this, just that. I'm going to click on the table component and I'm going to add a row action. And in this case, I'm just going to call it edit airport. This is once again an element of your system design. I'm going to close this out right now. And so at least now I see it. The second thing that I want to do is actions. And when it comes to the event loop, everything is handled through event handlers. The idea is when I do X, Y happens. And so here, what we want to do is open the modal. So if I click on the plus right here, you're going to have edit click action handler. And in the actions, it's not a query we want to trigger, it's a modal we want to open. So we want to control a component, and that component would be the modal. So I'll choose modal frame one, and let's see if this works. When I click on it, it opens. And by the way, and this is sort of a thing that I didn't even have to bind, the data source has automatically chosen the selected row. So by default, here as you can see, the first row is in Abu Dhabi, and it is showing me an airport in Abu Dhabi. If I clicked on the fourth row, which is, I shouldn't have chosen that one, no idea how you pronounce that. This one, you can see that it has chosen the right row. With this being said, we now wanted to add a submit button to this. To do this, we can add an event. So we again want an event handler. And the idea is that I have a form. I want to trigger an event. So I'm going to do one. And this is on the submit button. It's going to trigger a query. Now, right now it says to trigger query one, but that's not what I want because query one I know is the one to select all of my airports. I actually want to update the database. So to do this, let's use the Retool database. What I want to do is create a new one. So you can click on right here, create a new query. It will automatically call this form one submit handler. You want to reselect Retool database, and we want to write this one using very simple GUI sort of collection. So what I'm going to do in this case is the table that I want is the airport. I want to update an existing record. I want to filter by the ID that I have, and the ID that I'm going to choose is the one of the selected row. So once again, the only thing you need to know here is, so select the right resource, which is Retool database, go to GUI, airports, update an existing record, and the ID we want to filter by is the ID of the selected row. And here actually it's given me a bit of an idea of what it looks like in terms of syntax. It's exactly this one. And if I want to select the ID of that row, I can just do .id. And in this case, I see it's the fifth one, which hopefully is the fifth one in this list. The next thing that I want to do is the key value pairs that I want to change is the name. And I want to change it to the name input that I have in my field. So I'm just going to bind that and put name input dot value. And with that being said, normally if I change this to 2, I will first I'll test this out. So it does tell me that it would update the item, which is this airfield. And let me try this on, let me save this query, and then we'll run this query once again. So if I run this query, I've called it airfield 2. It tells me that it's called airfield 2. So at this point, we should be pretty happy with it. We've updated our table. We've had an event to open the modal. Then this modal, when I submit it, gives me airport 2. So I should be happy with this. The only thing actually is that I don't see the change. I don't see any change right here. And that's one thing also about events that my friend stumbled along upon quite a lot is when you're triggering events, at no point did we actually ask our system to re-query the events that the database has. So what's happened right now is that we've updated the database, but our system isn't aware that it's updated. So this is where, and this is why we're going to talk more about the event loop in general, is that you want to use queries, event triggers that triggers queries everywhere, be it for components or for modals. And when you run these kind of things, you can run them in a chain. So here, for example, you have the run behavior, which is manual. That's good to know. But you can have event handlers on top of this. And so say, well, on success, I want you to recall my first query. And this is how you're going to make sure that the set of rules that you bring are always used. And so if I save this and that I run this again, now I should actually see my system update to query 2, hoping that it will do so. So, oh, it's just that actually I haven't updated the form. So let me just update the form. Right, query 2. If I submit this, now it's called query 2 because I've recalled my backend to re-get the data. We've covered quite a lot right here when it comes to the event loop. There are a few things that I think you should be aware of. The first one is I mentioned that we had a run behavior that was manual or automatic. In this case, the difference between both of them is that one of them will run whenever anything it depends on changes. The other one will only run when it's triggered by an event. In the case of a form submission, you definitely want this to be triggered by an event because this is really what you need because you need it to only run at certain times. But for example, on our first query, it wouldn't make sense to do this. And this is why if I look at the run behavior, it is automatic because I don't want to have to re-trigger it every time somebody clicks on the navigation. I want it to trigger it automatically. Always think of that and sort of look into what are the run behaviors, what are the transform results that we've done, like the one on the second query. This is going to give you a lot of efficiency when it comes to what you're building and how it builds and make everything predictable in your system. So that's the main thing to remember of this section is you can trigger events at any given moment, but what you really want to do is know that you need to, when you're reading data and you write data back, reread that data to see it updated. Use event handlers, look at what the run behaviors is, and don't hesitate to transform the result at the right place so that everywhere else in your application, it actually makes sense what you're manipulating. This being said, let's move on to the last section, which is around best practices and using Assist. I'll make this very short and then we'll move into Q&A. So when it comes to best practices in engineering, actually, it's a huge field. As you can imagine, we've got so many different ways there are so many good practices out there that sometimes even for me, it's complicated to know what is a good practice anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on two of the main ones. One of them we'll just talk about, and the other one will actually do and show an application. As we've been building, we haven't been naming anything. So right now, everything's called query one, query two, form one, submit handler. And one of the principles in engineering is uh, think of your future self as somebody that you care for. Imagine if in, let's say, 12 days' time, you come back to this and you open an application, nothing's really named, everything's called tab one, button two, image one, etc. You won't be able to know what's going on. The first thing that we really recommend you to do is name everything with something that makes sense. And a quick tip for you is we've shared quite a lot of webinars around this, around our AI capabilities. Do not hesitate to use this. So in this case, what I would advise you to do is say, can you name the elements in my UI? Nothing is named right now. And the idea that you have behind this in best practice is that when you're going to come back to this, this table is going to be called the airports table. It also means that when you're going to be using them inside SQL or inside code, you're going to actually be naming things that make sense and not just saying, oh, use query one, use query two, use etc. So look at this more when it comes to naming. And what I'm going to do is just let it run while we talk about the second subject. And hopefully it's going to update it along the way. If you didn't follow, the assist part is on the bottom left-hand side. And so you can click on this element, which will open the UI, and then you can prompt it. There are many other things you can do with this, but I won't get into it right now. The second thing that we actually looked at in terms of best practices is where do I put my different logic and elements as a whole? Right now, as you saw on query two, we transform the result inside the query itself, which is great. It's a good practice. But really think when you're building applications, where do I want to put my logic? And try to avoid putting them inside the components themselves because it's just not reusable. And when we're talking about reusable logic, we have many different elements in the code section that you can then refer to anywhere across your application. And so let's say, for example, that while I was editing this part, one of the things that I wanted to do was check, for example, the length of the name. Now, I've got multiple ways of doing this. I could do this using validation rules, but I could also, for example, say, well, when you submit the form, before submitting the form, I want to check something specific. In that case, what you could do is you could actually write a huge function right here saying, oh, you want to go through the validation checks here before going into the form submit handler. But what you could also do, and this is sort of what we advise you to do, is use queries, transformers, and variables to really level up what you can do and make everything reusable and easy to make. So what I would do in this case is I would create a folder where I would call this, for example, submit logic. And in this case, I would have all of the logic, all of the business rules list linked to any submit inside my application. And inside that, I'd put in this case, probably query, where I would actually do checks on the elements that I have. By the way, as you can see, it's just renamed everything because right now, if I look at my elements, it's in the middle of renaming things, by the way. So this is called tabs airport now. This is called navigation one. This is called sidebar logo image. So assist is probably in the middle of renaming things as you can see it is. So that's great. I'm just going to ask it to auto approve all queries. You may have this to do. You can select this drop down auto approve and it will keep working on its own. When it comes to this logic, you would put it right here. And when it comes to making any validation check that you could have, this is where I would, for example, evaluate the value of this, which is text edit import. Is it modal? What is it called? Airport name. So this one dot value. And here I have, you don't need to put the curly brackets because you're in JavaScript. And here, for example, I have access to the value, which is Lom Latlata Airport. And I would evaluate them this, use the event loop, have a run behavior or an event handler that on success makes it work, and make your event loop go in cycles along that way. I'll stop here because I want to have time for a few questions. Thank you so much for your time in general. I hope we've covered quite a lot. I just wanted to go over the four things to remember before we go into Q&A. The first one is explore the design system, use the different elements fully, really look into them, and follow the guidelines that we sort of showed you. Second thing is think about your system and what should your backend do? What should your front end do? Who should see what at what time? This will allow you for your system to scale and really help your performance. The third thing is think about how data flows inside your application and remember that your systems are separated. So if you update your database, your front end won't know automatically. You really need to link everything together. And finally, have a thank me later approach. Implement the best practices for your future self. That being said, I'll just move into Q&A. And Ollie, if there's anything I need to know or that I haven't answered, please don't hesitate to jump in. I don't see any questions, so maybe actually we don't have anything in terms of Q&A. Oh, Ollie answered most of the questions. That's great. Thank you so much, Ollie. In that case, what I'm going to do is that we're probably going to wrap it there. So thank you so much for coming to this session. Please, you can scan this QR code. It's on the next one that Ollie will be running. It is around debugging Retool, AI-powered troubleshooting for your apps and workflows. It's going to be great. It's in February, and uh, by then, well, Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope you have a great end of the year, that you have time with your families and friends, and we hope to see you another time.